Thanks so much for taking the time to catch up today. From our side, we're super excited for this conversation. I think topic of culture is a big one at the moment, especially when it comes to hybrid and fully remote teams. Before we get stuck in, maybe we do a couple of quick intros so that the viewers know who we are. If I start, just a brief intro on me. I'm the talent manager at Seedcamp. My focus is very much portfolio, so supporting our founders on that journey from 0 to 1 when we back them at pre-seed all the way through to kind of Series A. So Brett, do you want to give a bit of an intro to you and Culture Gene?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So hi, I'm Brett. I'm the CEO of Culture Gene. I'm also an investor in Seedcamp and have been a mentor since the first Seedcamp, as a matter of fact. Culture Gene is a culture consultancy. We help companies develop effective hybrid, remote first or remote companies. We have developed different tools and different programs to help companies depending on the size and scale of the business. Typically, we work with companies that are growing rapidly and quickly and need to stabilize the DNA and the foundation so that that growth is built on solid foundations.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Brett. So let's kick off with a few questions then. I think there's no defined consensus whether or not working fully hybrid, fully remote, or being in an office is the right fit for teams in general. But from your perspective, when you're looking at it, what do you think are sort of major benefits and drawbacks from that fully remote or hybrid versus being in an office 5 days a week?
Yeah, so there's a number of different elements here. I think that if we look at first of all, is it possible to scale a fully remote or a hybrid environment? And we can see that it is possible to scale a company, a remote company or a hybrid company, because if you're intentional about building the remote work capability inside your company, you can see that companies like remote.com, who've scaled from startup to over 1,000 employees in 4 years in 60 countries, they're doing it well. And GitLab went from 100 people in 2016 to 1,800 now. They IPO'd, they did it over 7 years. So you can do it. And there are, as in all of these things, benefits and drawbacks. So, in like remote and GitLab, the benefits are you have access to this wider talent pool. You can hire and find the best employees anywhere. Some companies are saving money on office space and scaling quicker because of that. And studies have shown that remote and hybrid employees are happier and they're therefore more productive, so that you get more done. But on the other hand, if you aren't intentional about building this remote or hybrid work capability inside the company, you can see that there are communication and collaboration issues, there are cultural challenges, there are management and leadership challenges, and there are performance management challenges where it's difficult to track a remote and hybrid employee. So on the remote and hybrid side, there are the pros and cons. When it comes to the office, the pros are we know how to lead an office. We know we've done it before, most of us, and we are designed as humans for synchronous communication. So it's easier to communicate and collaborate. It's easier to develop the company culture. It often happens by default, and it's easier to lead and manage and easier to manage performance. But the drawbacks are limited access to this broader talent pool, maybe higher costs. And I think there's this decrease in employee flexibility. And I think this last one is going to be a long-term threat to companies that go fully office, because people want flexibility, they want just autonomy. So yeah, there's no easy answer, as you said. There's no silver bullet.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we can say is it's pretty universal that if you're trying to attract talent in this day and age, if you're saying 5 days in an office, it typically doesn't go down too well. So it is definitely pushing towards that hybrid or fully remote. But I think, yeah, the jury's still out to decide whether or not that's right for you as a specific company, because it does depend on the company and the culture directly. There was something that you said there that I thought was pretty interesting, which is the kind of performance management piece. And if we're looking at remote teams in general, so exclusively remote, sometimes some of the challenges there is actually kind of identifying where there are performance challenges. And this doesn't necessarily allude to individuals per se, but the sort of pipeline of process in a fully remote business. And I think you probably come into at startups frequently where the founder knows there's a problem with performance as a business, but doesn't necessarily know where. And I think this is some of the problems with fully remote businesses is actually because everything is virtual and async, sometimes it's very hard to understand where those bottlenecks are. So it's interested from your perspective as to how do you even go about identifying where those bottlenecks are within a business that's fully remote? And then how do you even fix them?
Yeah, so the bottlenecks are happening ultimately because of remote work friction. And remote work friction is happening because most companies are working remotely, but as if they were still in the office. So they aren't being intentional about building that remote capability. If you think about it, there, broadly speaking, there are these bottlenecks, and the friction is happening in areas of collaboration and people management. Because we're doing these things the way we've done them all along. So when it comes to collaboration, if you aren't defining your key processes, then I have to work out how the process works if I'm new to your business or if I'm new to the team. If you aren't being deliberate about developing a documentation capability, I have to work out how to find out information and waste people's time by being in sync with them and giving them a call. If you aren't balancing synchronous and asynchronous communication and working out what you should do when and building rules and structure around this, then that's where the friction happens. If you aren't being deliberate about building social capital and social connection as your business scales, then people lose connection, contact, and trust over time. And then if you aren't being, for example, transparent, people can't find the information they need when they need it. So that's on the collaboration side. And then on the people management side, managers haven't adapted necessarily to adapt to working in a remote work environment. Remote work companies manage and lead differently, outcomes based. And actually, to your point around performance, they have a way of ensuring that performance, that you know who's performing. You're aware of, but and that's actually at a micro level. So it's the manager and team individual's responsibility to be on top of performance, so that can be fed up into the leadership.
Yeah. So I guess it's a balance of over communicating as a default, making sure that everyone is aware of what's going on, but not being too overbearing as a single focal point as a founder to kind of trust your teams to deliver on the projects that they've set out to do independently. If I could try and wrap that bit up. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think there is ultimately, if you don't trust the people you've hired, you probably didn't hire very well.
Yeah.
Or you've got to look to yourself and who you are. Yeah, I think you've nailed it.
On the topic of hiring, I've always found that having spoken to people that are interested in working in fully remote businesses, I don't think I can put a nail on it, but have a difference in style or just general background. They seem to really love that style of working. And it kind of got me thinking, have you seen a typical persona of a leader that does really well in a remote first business?
Yeah, so actually there's some research on this. So Georgia Southern University did a study before the pandemic, interestingly enough, and they had 220 teams of 4 people in each team, and they split them into 2, and they said, you 110 teams of 4 go and work in the office and go choose your leader. You 110 teams of 4 go and work remotely and choose your leader. When they came back after their project, the office-based leaders that were chosen generally broadly had the following characteristics. They were charismatic, they were hierarchical, they were verbal, and they were good at delegating. The remote-based leaders were coaches, mentors, facilitators, project management minded. And this really is the crux of some of the leadership challenges that are happening right now, because you struggle to lead through charisma in a remote environment. And if you are hierarchical and you expect that structure, it doesn't work that well in a remote working environment. So yeah, you'll find that leaders that are chosen are those coach, facilitator, mentor types versus the charismatic, what I would call maybe in-office suitable leadership.
And I guess off the back of that question, the first thing that I think of is, during COVID, where a lot of teams were forced to shift straight from the office environment to a fully remote culture, leaderships didn't change, right? And then we had a lot of these pain points where teams weren't operating at nearly the same performance they were before, and some thrived, some accelerated, and maybe it was because they had a completely different style. But it is interesting, I think, as a general topic.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we work on with our clients, is for them to understand how managers and the difference between office-based and hybrid or remote, because actually ultimately hybrid and remote, whether you like it or not, are the same thing, because we don't know how to do the remote element of remote work. So there is now a difference in that. So
yeah. Touching back on a previous point that you touched on lightly, was sort of avoiding micromanagement in a larger sort of remote or hybrid setting. It's never liked by employees, but often it's the default in these settings, because you're not constantly keeping an eye on your employees. And I think the default is to drop a message on Teams or Slack and say, what are you doing right now? And this can build a really negative culture, in my opinion, and can be a real problem, and ultimately result in huge turnover. I would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, micromanagement is super destructive. It's the one thing that, it's even in an office environment, it was bad, but now if you're a micromanager, your people have to show you that they are working, which means that they are slowly but surely either getting burnt out or they are lying. Ultimately, they're doing things to show you they're working, which is really just terrible. But actually, what I've seen remote work companies use is this idea that Andy Grove came up with, called task relevant maturity. And it's this idea of how capable is the individual of doing the set of tasks they have to complete the project. And so as a remote manager, if you understand the project and you understand the tasks that the person has to do to complete the project, you can then go and say, okay, there are 6 tasks. Which ones have you done well before? Which ones haven't you done before? And if I haven't done task 3 and 4 before, you can say to me, okay, Brett, I will help you with that, and I will monitor you, and I will train you how to do task 3 and 4, but I know you can do the rest. So as your manager, I know when you need me. If you need me other than that, you'll ask, but actually I specifically know there will be issues, and those bottlenecks and that friction will form with tasks 3 and 4. And this is a super powerful way of overcoming that. It's a slightly different way of leading, but it's something that I've seen used extensively in remote work companies.
It comes back to that emotionally mature project manager persona that you referenced, right? I think it's very important. Another thing we're seeing is, especially businesses that were office based first and then during COVID went fully remote and then stayed that way, whether that was for performance based reasons or just it worked. They've found, and sometimes this is a big challenge for founders and CEOs, is that their culture begins to dilute. I don't think this is a problem if you're remote first from day one, because you build in those elements and you hire for it. But some businesses really struggle and their culture dilutes and they start losing people and they don't know how to stop that drain. Have you seen this? And how would you recommend a leader tries to stop that brain drain and maintain a positive culture in a business like that?
Yeah, so I've seen this. So what typically, if you were in the office before the pandemic and then you've decided to go hybrid or remote, the thing that we don't fully grasp or appreciate is the extent to which the office helped us with our culture development. So the office gives us the physical proximity and the osmosis and learning by observation. For when you're office based, you almost don't, especially in the early days, you don't need to be that intentional about your culture. You can catch up when it's 50 or 100 people and start being more deliberate then, because then the wheels start to feel a little bit shaky. But actually moving across means that the office, the value that the office gave us has been obliterated. And even in hybrid environments, the office is not as effective as it was. It can't be. The osmosis isn't going to happen. So as a leader, what you need to do is understand what you've lost. And then you've got to make up for that in different ways. So one example of that is the office gave us ease of collaboration. Okay, great. What does that mean? And that means now let's think about how do we overcome the friction now that, because we're used to working in the office, how do we overcome that? What do we do around that? So maybe we have to be a little bit more intentional about defining key processes and making sure everybody's aware and keeping those processes up to date. That's as much of what is remote work culture now as is, okay, let's review the values. Let's look at, are they applicable to, because we went from an office environment, are they still applicable to our remote work environment? And then let's go and say, okay, what are the behaviors? And then be really intentional at the leadership level, that sort of the VP level or the director level. And then what you really got to be communicating and celebrating and rewarding and recognizing all the way down. And it's easy for people to forget what the vision and mission are and what the values are, because I'm working in my house, I've got this scenario. So as a leader, you've got to be way more intentional, but you've also got to make up for what you've lost.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think on the topic of stating your mission and vision, it is very, very important. Some organizations completely forget to mention this to the new employees, as well as existing and old ones that often, if you ask, will probably have forgotten. And I think it's really important to reinstate that on a reasonably regular basis. Obviously, I don't overdo it, but it's important for them to really feel that and live and breathe it as well.
Yeah.
I think also the other thing is sort of the engagement and enjoyment. And that's something that some businesses have risked of losing, because it's all work, 9 till 5, 9 till 6, and there isn't any time for social interaction on a sort of like going for a coffee in the office. You lose that in a fully remote business, and finding ways on rekindling those elements of social connection between team members is also really important, right?
Yeah, it's hugely important that when we're working remote, we become remote. And if you look at companies like GitLab or Buffer or Zapier or Doist or TopTel, they are really intentional about making the teams come up with ideas around social connection. So one of the ideas that came through the teams at Hotjar was to develop tribes, where you'd have somebody from sales, marketing, engineering, finance, customer success, one from each of the teams forms a tribe, and those tribes met once a month. And they would either talk about their own stuff, or the company would ask them to talk about something and come back. But because of that cross-departmental collaboration thing, it just really strengthened those tribes, broke across those natural barriers and silos that form.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's finding ways. I always try and say the leadership shouldn't come in and say, this is what we're going to do. Make your team work out what they want to do, because then it's not your fault.
That makes sense. So another topic, kind of flipping the other way, right? Rather than focusing on remote, a lot of our businesses in our portfolio, at least, are beginning to head back into the office and gradually increase that time in the office. So going from either fully remote or 1 or 2 days up to sort of 3 or 4, because their team have said that they enjoy it. But I could put a clear caveat there that that's some of the team, not all of the team. And I don't think there is a perfect answer to this question, Brett. So sorry for throwing you under the bus here, but how do you manage that process? Because, like I say, you're always going to have people that are unhappy with one solution or the other. Is there an answer there?
So when you said some of the team want to be in the office, I think you probably were saying is the leadership team and some of the team want to be in the office ultimately, because the leadership team are going to drive this. And if you're going to do this, that's fine. However, you have to accept that you're going to lose good people and you're going to disengage some people. It's just the way it is. And I think as a business, you must accept that if you're going to go into the office and be more in the office, 4 days or 5 days a week in the office, or go from 1 to 3 days in the office, there are people who don't want to spend an hour on the tube or in a car. They got kids, they got this, they got lives. But I think if you look at it, so Ian Goodfellow was the chief of machine learning at Apple, and Apple headhunted him from Google. And in 2022, Apple went from being remote to coming back into the office, and Ian just put his hand up and said, all right, I resign. Okay. Now, if Apple can't keep their people, you certainly are not going to magically keep their people. Goodfellow went back, he went to DeepMind. So, they lost obviously an incredible brain and incredible capability. And I would expect you may too, but that's the way your leadership needs to lead. So go there, expect it. I think over the long term, this flexibility is going to cost you, because candidates are going to say, how flexible are you? What's your hybrid policy? What's your remote work policy? And if you say we don't, then I think your pool of talent is just going to do this. And you're already limited to your city or your town, whatever it is. So
Right.
those are just the realities. But if that's the way your leadership team wants to work, it is what it is.
Yeah, I guess it's an opportunity cost as well on balancing stickiness of talent versus opening up your pool to a worldwide base of great people and giving that flexibility, which is a benefit to so many, especially now. Can you impose on this topic mixed rules? So, for example, what I see in a lot of teams is the engineering function love to work remotely, right? Like I never speak to an engineer that says, I love being inside the four walls of my office 5 days a week. But I do hear salespeople say that. And I'm massively generalizing here, and there probably are many exceptions, but you probably get my drift here. Could you just put the sales team in the office and the engineering team completely remote? Is that viable?
Companies are doing it. The companies who also have younger, for whatever reason, they hire a lot of younger people, are putting them in the office. It's viable if you manage it properly. So I believe that if you had a hybrid or a remote first or a remote mindset, then you can have people in an office as long as they have a remote first approach to working. So they're not, obviously things are going to happen in the office. That's the way it is. You're not going to sit there mute. But if you do calls, you're not going to have the sales team all in one boardroom and the 4 marketing people dialing in. You're all going to dial in, or, no matter where anybody is. So it is doable. There's, you've got this 4 pretty much types of hybrid. There's company mandated, team mandated, individual mandated, or blended, so where somebody has to be in the lab or something. And working through which one you want to do, but understanding, okay, these are the downsides of them, and this is how we need to overcome those. We need to build a structure and a system to overcome these limitations or issues that develop. I think, yes, you can make it work as long as there is an understanding across the organization of what making it work means.
Yeah, makes sense. I think this topic specifically is something that we could probably have spent the whole 30 minutes talking on, because it's something that's really interesting, and I think this is going to become maybe a different type of hybrid trend that moves forward, but we'll see. But Brett, I really appreciate you taking the time. I think we've covered quite a lot there. There might be some questions that arise from our founders off the back of this. So I think I'm going to open an invitation that if anyone does have questions, they can reach out to Brett or myself after listening to this, and happy to help.
Absolutely, James. Thanks very much for the invitation. These are challenges that have to be worked out, and I'm happy to give some input where I can.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks.